Welcome to Powerhouse Bakery. I like the comment that every day it's veggie day at Powerhouse Bakery. So I love that. That is definitely my slogan. And what we're doing today is we're still in Gadgets That Work. And we're going to do veggie prep like a pro. Veggie prep like a pro. Because every day we do want to have copious amounts of veggies, and the challenge is whether you're cooking for 1 or 2 or 15 or in our case 100, we always are kind of challenged with how do we buy them as close to the event as possible so that they're all fresh, and how do we store them in a way that they're going to stay as long as we need to in order to use up everything, because we hate to waste. So that's kind of the challenge that I wanted to come across today. I bet that we all have crisper bins in our refrigerator. So if I could take a tally, who uses their crisper bins in the refrigerator? Yes? Who has so that was everybody, raise their hands. What about storing in a humid crisper bin versus a dry crisper bin? Anybody have a distinction there, or is it just kind of in the drawer, everything goes? Yeah? A little bit of both? So that's what I want to talk about. So the crisper bins in our refrigerator isn't really a gadget, but it kind of is, because we all have a refrigerator, and that's where all of this is going to go. So I hope that, just like in my case, I learn new things. I hope you will learn new things too about how to use what you already have, which is your refrigerator crisper bins. The other thing we're going to talk about is containers. And I actually did try to order us some special containers to look at, and I thought, and they didn't come in, sadly, they're back ordered. But I realized that we might not buy specialty bags anyway, so let's just use with what we have. Many areas of the country are very specific about not using plastic or reusing plastic, going more to more reusable resources, and even not using paper as much as possible. And so when I visited that beautiful house in Santa Fe, I think I shared with you that fun little trip I took, and this lady's beautiful kitchen, she did not have paper towels anywhere. And she had copious amounts of towels everywhere, but she did not have even her plastic bags were, you could tell, reused, which was a little odd for me as a guest in her home. I was like, I pull out this bag and wonder where it's been. I mean, I could tell that it had been washed, but it was a little odd. But the idea is that if we were to invest in even a higher quality reusable plastic bag, we would really be in business. And so I'm going to put that down as a gadget that I think we could all benefit from, is reusable plastics. And strangely, I think it was 2 Christmases ago, I bought my step-granddaughters these really cool little reusable bags, these little totes, and they were of different sizes. And those just came to mind as I was thinking how cool it would be. But I didn't have them, of course. I'd given them as a gift, and I couldn't find any online that were in stock. So the reality is, here in Texas, we're not as conscientious at doing, reusable and protecting our environment with what we put in our big trash bins, and of course our dumps. And so being more aware of that, I think, is going to be really good. So everybody has some homework, and that is to investigate what kind of reusable bags might work for you. The other thing that is really cool are little brown bags. Yeah, paper. And you know how at the grocery store, I mean, we really went through this phase of paper or plastic, that like, gosh, I feel bad for the people that work at HEB. That must go through their mind when they're sleeping. Do you want paper or plastic? All right. And then they stopped asking us because we Texans didn't care so much. And we said, plastic. And a lot of us probably do recycle those plastics and put them in the recycle bins at HEB. Anybody do that? Yeah, good. Everybody's nodding. Yay, yay. So if you have recyclables, that certainly helps. But the brown bags are nice because they also degrade a lot faster than the plastics. And so, Mary, when you have a chance, will you bring me one of our little our brown bags? Because I want to be able to use that. Thank you so much. Yeah, perfect. So these are our Powerhouse Bakery bags, and I hope that if you buy anything from us, you reuse these a ton. And these are actually great for storing a few of our produce. Anybody want to guess what would be stored well in a brown bag? No? Nobody knows? Okay, good. Avocados? Oh, now see, that's new to me. All right, avocados. Well, and like I said, there's most likely many alternatives to what we're going to do today, but I wanted to at least give you some fun ideas. So I'll probably start with herbs. So as we know, we're going to really look for how to prep veggies so that they're easy to use. They're going to last longer in our fridge and, just give us a nice variety. One thing I always remind folks to do when they're shopping is to get a nice variety of fresh and then also get a few things frozen so that as the week progresses, you use the fresh first and then you can always have a good variety in the freezer section. Even if you buy products fresh and you realize, oh, golly, these were on sale, so I got a few extras, wash them, put them in a Ziploc bag and freeze them. Works really well. So a lot of times fresh and freeze is a beautiful way to go. So let's get started. When we first look at our grocery list, we're going to look at herbs. How do we preserve fresh herbs? So I've got a nice variety here. I'm going to pull them out. The way they sell fresh herbs at HEB, I think leaves a lot to be desired. These little bags, they don't hold up very well. I bet you have seen, though, the way the basil is stored. Anybody buy the basil that's in a cute little cup of water? Yes, that's fantastic. So the recommendation is to, in fact, store your herbs like you do fresh cut flowers. So as I cut through these, I'm just going to open them up and I'm going to trim the stems just like you would do fresh flowers. This is perfect for basil and parsley, cilantro, even your arugula, and even watercress. Now, the bay leaves, which is the first ones I pulled out, I dropped one, is a little different. So these are quite firm leaves. And so these don't absorb water nearly as much as the fresh cut herbs or the moist herbs. So I'm going to put these in a little side container. This is going to be for my herbs. So I'm going to put them right on the side because really I don't need them to be as wet as some of the other ones. Now, the rest of the herbs I'm going to cut and moisten the edges and put them in some paper towel. So here I've got the beautiful mint, and I'm going to trim the edges and put them in like a bouquet. Absolutely fabulous. So first I'm going to also look through, notice that there's some that are dark edges. So I'm going to peel all those off because some of the problem with the herbs degrading is if they already have some bacteria on them or they're moist and causing that mold to grow that spreads to all the other herbs. So that's exactly what we don't want. So I'm going to trim the edges of my mint into a little trash bin. And some of the YouTubers, I don't know if you've been following any of the YouTubers, but kind of the in thing right now is to save all your cuttings, and of course compost is good, but also saving them for veggie broth. Now that we're getting into the colder months, it's so nice to have veggie broth. So mint as well as all the herbs are going to be a great addition to a veggie broth. So I'm going to use my first bag and start putting in all the trimmings so I have a beautiful setup. So when I get to the larger stem veggies, those are going to go into my bag too for my veggie broth. So any of the cuttings from my mint and my basil, and of course all the other herbs. Now I'm going to get this a little bit of water. And I'm going to start getting my towels moist, because these are going to be what I put into my containers. So again, I could use paper towels. I'm trying to be like, all the cool folks in Santa Fe that don't use paper. And so we do need copious amounts of clean towels. But I kind of was thinking about this. It makes sense if we're going to theoretically shop once a week, maybe even once or twice a month, then we could wash our towels every time we put in fresh produce, or we empty one of the bins and we put a fresh towel in the bin. Anybody use a cloth towel in their crispers? Yeah, I didn't either. So the answer was no to most of the heads nodding, those of you that are watching us on video. So now I've got my moist towel, and I'm going to put it right in the base. So again, my bay leaves that don't need as much moisture are going to go on the very end, and I'm just going to let the tips of my mint touch the towel. Now again, we could put it in a glass full of water, but what I have found is this works. It can absorb slowly, and what's really important is we don't want the leaves to get wet. And so on the larger herbs, a larger bag of herbs, here's our cilantro and our parsley. I'm going to wash these, shake them dry, and I save my twisty ties for another use, but I never want to throw those away. So I'm going to trim the edges, put them into my compost baggie, and I could cut them really short because again, it's not going to go into a glass of water, but if I needed it to, I could leave the stems nice and long. But I just trim them so that it can get fresh water, just like you do fresh cut flowers. And again, I'm going to lay them on my damp towel. The other thing that's important is you want to get good airflow around the leaves. So we don't want to overfill at all. So the other thing that's nice is when you wash your produce and shake it dry as much as you can, get all the water off, the little bit of water that's left on the leaves needs to get absorbed. We don't want it to sit on the leaves. So that's when you could put another towel over the top, or again, if you wanted to use a paper towel, you could. And so using another one of the little towels, this one's going to be dry, and I'm going to put it over the top to absorb any of the extra moisture that was left on the leaves. So it works pretty well. That way, when I put the container, my Cambro lid on here, it's going to help keep a moist environment. So if we're in the crisper, the herbs or anything that has a leaf that might wilt needs to go into the crisper that is high humidity. So let's write that down. That's like a good note. So herbs in our crisper where it's high humidity. So you know how on your crispers you have little dials? And honestly, I never really knew where they go. I just kind of, I guess in the middle. But now I feel like I have purpose. The one that's going to have all of the leaves that are more delicate, we want to put in the crisper and turn that dial all the way up to high humidity. I can create my own little chamber with some sort of, container, and that's what I've done here. And it's going to also be controlled environment. It'll be wet on the bottom, drier on the top to help make sure there isn't too much water sitting on the leaves. And then I'll put my lid on it, and it's a perfect little chamber to keep my herbs fresh. So if I go to the next category, same idea really with the basil and the mint. I think I've already showed you that one. The basil's a little more sensitive though. It does not really like to go in the fridge. Anybody seen that case, that situation happen? If you try to put them in the fridge, even if it's in that little clam, sometimes the leaves turn dark. It's very sensitive, does not like the cold. So the basil is going to be treated just like a little bouquet of flowers. See, this guy doesn't want to open. So I am still going to trim the edges, and I'm going to put it into a vase and let it sit right on the counter. Cecilia, will you hand me that little plastic cup? Thank you so much. That's going to be my vase. Thank you. So any kind of container, I'm going to use this one just to show you. But what I really like is to use a mason jar that's kind of squat and wide. So once I trim the edges, and if you have any kind of jar, you can use that. But of course the plastic cups work great too, and that's how they come. So just enough water for the ends to go in, and you can stuff it pretty full, just as long as there's a little bit of airflow all around the edges. So you see when we buy them, the edges are dark, they're dried out, so it's stopping the absorption of the water. Notice too that this one's got lots of connections. If I wanted to really improve the water flow, I'm going to cut above that just like you would do on flowers, so it has better flow into the leaves. So now I've got all of my leaves above the water, most of them it looks like, and the stems in the water. So I'm just going to do that with all of my basil. Just stick them in like you would flowers. Don't want to get too much water, again, because you really don't want the leaves in there. So I've got a couple little leaves in there which I could move around and make sure they're above. And then this is going to stay right on the counter, so it doesn't get cold. We don't want it in direct light. If you're really lucky though, you could buy a basil plant. Anybody do this? And it just grows and grows. So even the one that looks like it's hydroponic and it just has the little cube of roots, that's the one I've grown now in my home. And if you keep trimming it, it'll keep growing. And it's just fabulous to be able to go out into your porch or your counter and snip off some fresh basil. So definitely do that. But again, this is just fine too if you don't have a spot to really grow a basil plant. So I absolutely love that one. So herbs like this don't last well at all, so I would never want you to buy one like this and just leave it in the fridge and hope for the best, because it'll be bad in a day or two. So very disappointing, but a reality. So basil, if you buy it in larger bulk, make sure that you get a container large enough to put the whole bundle in, or break it into smaller amounts, but we don't want to leave it in this. Okay, so now we're going to go on to a little bit larger. We've got still our high humidity category. So if we talked about basil, this is the only one that doesn't go in to the crisper. We're going to say out on counter. So again, we can easily survive without a special bag. Again, I think mason jars are really fun, but getting a nice squat wide one that allows the basil to sit in there and not fall in too deep is a really great gadget. So I'm going to say look for a mason jar for your basil. It should be kind of a squat wide mouth. Yeah, so that works for basil. So if same idea is going to work really well for other herbs. So I've got parsley here, I've got some cilantro I've already done. So same idea for all the ones that are going to wilt. You can make that chamber, and of course you can use just your crisper, and you can put the cloth in there, and rewashing the cloth, make sure the base is moist even when you put it in the crisper. So the next one is going to be the leaf lettuces. They're still in the category of ones that go in high humidity because they could wilt. And so what I've got to show you here is a couple of fun ones. I don't know how often you buy bok choy, but this one is great. Now I've used baby bok choy, but when I saw this one this morning at H-E-B, I thought, wow, that's beautiful, right? It's so big and clanky, but it's a beautiful bok choy. Anybody have a recipe they like to do with bok choy? Yes, saute with olive oil and onions. I love it. That's wonderful, Rachel. And when you do bok choy, you jump in here. Do you kind of start with the stalk and put the leaves in towards the end of the saute because they're much tougher? Yeah, me too. Me too. I mean, in a soup, I would probably put the top of the leaves in at the very end, maybe at serving. But when I'm cooking the soup and I really want to let all those vegetables cook down, I would probably put the base in. So to get this prepped for storage, I am going to still slice off the base. So I've sliced off the base. Now, if you've watched some YouTubers, they love to show you how you can grow this into another vegetable. So celery works like this, carrots, fennel, and all of them that have this base. I have not had a lot of luck. Anybody? Anybody been able to do that? I had the, let's see, I think it was a fennel growing for quite a while. So it could have just been that I didn't water it enough, or, it was too hot in Texas. But I did get roots. Right now it doesn't even show any roots. So I'm not sure that I could do. But, if anything ever happens to HEB, we better learn how to do this. Right? If it goes down, whew, scary thought. But our leaves, whether it be leeks, or of course the big veggies like this, are going to need to be cleaned. So this is a perfect setting where I'm going to wash them, shake off the water, and prepare my chamber so that these can stay in good shape. So I don't want to trim them yet because I know, oh, look, there's even a bug in there. Holy moly. That means it's healthy. It means that if it's healthy for the bug, it must be healthy for us. So yeah, we're going to wash them, shake it off, and we are not going to prep the soft leaves separate from the stem, because that's going to really help nourish the top leaves. So we're going to keep them intact, and we're going to dress them as the whole leaf. I'm going to show you a couple different options to be able to store them. So I've got this really nice size container, and they don't always fit perfectly. So there's some cases where we can slice them and make them a little bit easier to fit, but it's also okay just to gently fold. So this actually works just fine. So that's going to be in my bin. And if you don't have, big bins like this, don't worry, because I'm going to show you another option just with your towel. But to kind of carry through this idea, we're going to do the same process, a little bit of moisture. And of course, remember, I'm going to have already cleaned these, rinse them, bring them, shake them off. This just has a little bit of moisture, and it goes in my base. And I'm going to put it as close to the ends as possible. So it's just going to lay in there so that the towel is close to the ends. So pretty simple, right? And I know you're thinking, gosh, this is a lot of work for bok choy. You were thinking that, weren't you? The other thing, too, is if you do meal prep, wash them, dry them as much as you can, and then cook them. Yeah, I know that'll take up half your Sunday, but if you cook them, now they can store even easier, because once you cook them, you're killing the enzymes, and it's going to last probably a little longer. But this is going to work really well, and all I would do is, after I wash each leaf, I'm going to layer them in opposition so that there's good airflow around them. So almost as important as the moisture is the airflow. I think even with this one, because it's so big, I would probably even put another towel on this end, on this side, so that I can go back and forth. And remember, when the lid is tight fitting, even if it's not in direct contact with the moist towel, it's still going to create a nice humid environment. So crisper, or this scenario, and layering them once they've been cleaned. Going to work really well. And again, this bok choy is huge, so I'm going to probably need to vary how I put them in, but the leaves are pretty forgiving. So a gentle bend will certainly be fine. The other thing I think is not a bad idea is, even though I cut off the very end piece, I think I'm going to also cut off a little bit more of that end. So see, now I've got a really moist edge for it to be able to absorb the moisture. So that way, it's not only going to give me a little more length to work with, it's also going to give me a really good end to make sure it gets plenty of moisture. Yeah, so see, that's working really great. So if you don't have a container and you don't want to deal with that with your crisper, say it's already full, what would be another approach? Well, let me show you that. Again, I'm going to take a little bit more off the end, and I'm going to keep my towel. So I've already washed them. There's going to be quite a bit of moisture left on the leaves. Shake off as much as I can, and then I'm going to fold them into my towel. So I'm going to diagonal fold and put another leaf in. So I'm going to show it to you here. So I'm alternating leaf and fold, leaf and fold. So it's all wrapped up like a little baby. So I've seen a lot of YouTubers do it this way, and it works so well because they'll last for a good week in here, maybe even more. So it's all in my little towel, and this can easily fit on the lower shelf of my refrigerator. So it's really nice option. These little ones we could even put into our bin, because again, you can kind of make room for those little small pieces. So anytime you're not ready to cook them, storing them in these two different methods will be such a nice approach to keeping your long veggies nice and fresh. Okay, so now let me go to another one. This one, the beets are fabulous. And I always say never pick out beets that don't already have the tops on them. Anybody cook beets? Yes. Okay, good. So I always choose beets that are loaded with beautiful greens. Love that. So I am going to store them differently. The beet itself, I'm going to cut off the stem, and these are going to get stored in the crisper also. But unlike the high humidity, this one's going to go into the low humidity. So let me hold that one for just a minute because we're still on the high humidity category. So I've got all my beautiful beet greens. And I always think about my great aunt. Her name was Lula May. That's a crazy name, right? Lula May, but she was amazing. She died like in her 90s, and she would drag my mom along, who was like 20 years her junior, to travel all around. So it was I have great memories of her. But she said never miss out on eating beet greens. And so to prep them, what I do is cut out that center rib. So now I just have the beautiful leaves. So just like everything else, I'm going to wash right when I get home. I'm going to cut off the beets for a separate storage. I'm going to hold the ends, run it under water. And honestly, I do get organic when I can, but some of them just don't. Like these are organic. Sometimes, though, we don't have organic. So remember we learned in our past class that even if they're not organic, running under copious amounts of running water is fine to clean them. And when they are organic, you still want to do the same thing. So that makes me think, well, there's probably not too high of a risk in some of these veggies. When we get to kale, that one I'll tell you a little bit more about. But for sure, beet greens, whether they're organic or not, a good rinse under running water is fine. And then we're going to take off those stems. So I might just get rid of the ends first. And these are going to be the perfect for my veggie broth. So I'm going to stick those right in my bag. And then I'm going to proceed to cut the centers out. And I know I said in the past, don't trim them until you're ready to use them. But this is going to encourage me to use them right away. Because I've got everything out, I might as well take the stems out and the ribs. So I've got all these beautiful, clean beet greens, and they are so delicious in a very quick saute. So once they're washed, they're ready to go. I'm going to put them in my bag. And I could put a napkin or a paper towel in here, but sometimes if I do that, I might forget what I have, right? So the ones I know I'm going to use right away, I'm going to leave just exposed, and that'll remind me, use them today or maybe tomorrow. But because they've been washed and they've been dried, put into the plastic bag, they do last pretty well. I confess it's probably sometimes 3 or 4 days before I get to them, as long as they're not mashed in there. Anytime the leaves are bruised, if you get a bruise, that's when it lets off a chemical that starts to break down. So whenever I'm packing my groceries, I actually don't like them to touch my produce, because oftentimes the baggers, they'll just smoosh them and grab them and put them in, and I just want to cry because that ruins them. So even if it has a tiny stem or a tiny vein, I might leave that. But for sure, these big ones, I'm going to trim out so that I've got beautiful beet greens ready to go. I can put them in an eggs and greens frittata. I can just saute them and put them with some organic brown rice pasta, maybe with a little garlic and onion. Any ideas how you might use greens? You could do just a saute on the side with a cut of meat. You could put them on the base of a salmon if you're going to, right? Bake a salmon and then put it on a bed of beet greens. Oh, it's very exotic and so pretty. So yeah, use them often. So that's really the best way to do the beet greens. Bag them up separately. Make sure you cut out the rib. Once they're as dry as you can, putting them in the baggie is fine. If they're going to need to stay in there a little bit longer, that's when you want to put in the paper towel into your bag so that it pulls the moisture away and doesn't let them get over wet. Okay? All right, so now our next category. So we've talked about the leaf lettuces. We want to pull the moisture off. We want to use a paper towel if we need to, or a regular towel. You can certainly put them in a bag. So the 5-gallon bag. It's not a 5-gallon. I think it's a 1-gallon, right? 5-gallon would be huge. Gallon bag. Paper towel if you want, or just a regular towel. And I'm really going to try to be like the 20-somethings where they're very conscientious and they don't waste paper. So cloth, I'm going to try to get used to. Zipping them up. Of course, you're washing them, shaking them, doing the best you can to get most of the water off, and then that paper towel will pull off the rest. If they're still quite wet, the paper towel should be dry. If they're really dry, the paper towel should be wet. Okay? All right, so that's high humidity. Now we're going to go to the low humidity. So this could be in your crisper in the low humidity. It could even be on the counter. So low humidity. So that's where the beets come in. What else? What other veggies do you think would live in low humidity? Yeah. Well, actually, hold on to the idea of carrots. I learned something new about carrots. So the ones that I'm thinking of now will be ones that might live in the earth. So potatoes, onions, potato, onion, garlic. Yeah, even if anybody work with rutabaga and turnips? Yeah. Love it. And of course, in Texas, we don't have a veggie cellar. Anybody come from the Midwest that had a cellar where they stored stuff? No? We're all Texans to the heart, right? But these want low humidity. They also want to be stored separate from fruits, separate from the high humidity vegetables, obviously. So we wouldn't put our lettuces into the same side of the crisper as we would our potatoes. That would be like, no, they don't live well together at all. Even on the counter, we don't want potatoes to live with onions. They need to be separate. Have you ever heard that? That was new to me. So they kind of want to live separate. And that just means at least in a separate bowl. So it doesn't mean that you have to put one on one side of the kitchen and one on the other so they don't fight, like my dogs lately. Oh my goodness. But they do better if they are by themselves. And so if we're having a bowl on the counter, we're going to put our onions in separately. So onions really like to have a cool environment. We don't want any light because you know what happens. What happens? They sprout. Yes. So cool with no light. So you guys haven't seen my pantry. On my Thursday class, the Zoom, if any of you guys go to that one, you've seen a tour of my kitchen. And my pantry is big and open. And so it works really well to have the potatoes on one side and the onions on the other because there isn't any light. And the story I always tell is when I was designing this house, I really wanted windows in my pantry. And the contractor looked at me like I was a crazy woman. What does she know about her pantry? Of course you don't want windows in your pantry. And I really did. But then I listened to him, and now I secretly think, okay, well, maybe he had something because now my potatoes and my onions aren't sprouting. So they go separately and by themselves. They live happily on one corner. And then when I get my potatoes, which maybe I didn't bring over, they need to live in a separate bowl. So just like that, on the other side of the counter is perfectly fine. So it needs to be cool, it needs to be dark. And no moisture. Has anybody tried to grow a potato? Yes, it works well, right? As soon as you see the eyes starting to pop, I'm growing some red onion right now because it was left in the sunny part of my kitchen, and sure enough, the green starts growing. So you can plant it, of course, with the root side down and the green side up, and it will be a beautiful plant in about a month. Same thing with garlic. And so, you know, whenever we add light, these guys grow beautifully. Turnips, I'm really less familiar with as far as storing, because really at the bakery, we've just started in the last 6 months loving turnips. And I've noticed that sometimes turnips as well as rutabaga have kind of a waxy film around it. Anybody notice that? Those that use it often? So I think that is because they aren't used as quickly here, and so they are waxed in order to promote longer shelf life and not sprout. So be on the lookout for that. Here we scrub that off and cook them. So, you know, short answer is I've never seen turnips try to sprout and grow, and it could be for that reason. But I think that probably the best thing is to not even put these in your crisper. I would say this is counter space. So this gives you an opportunity to have a cute little basket or something that you'll put them in. It needs to have good airflow, so super important for good airflow. So the exception is really the beets. If we left those out on the counter, do you think that they would act the same as the potato? Not quite. Because they have such a big root, and you know, even though we take the greenery off, they are much more volatile to drying out. So you can cut off the root of your beets and put them in the low humidity section of your refrigerator, or you can wrap them in a towel, and it can be a damp towel. I'll use this one. And leave them on your counter. But the thing that we don't want to have happen is if it gets moist and warm, guess what'll grow? Mold. So moist towel in your low humidity crisper will be the best way to store the beets. And my hunch is that turnips are the same way. But again, because they have that wax coating, I've never really seen them do anything other than sit there. So moist towel for your beets in the refrigerator in the low humidity. Okay? So that's our beautiful beets. Now, what about if we go even to the next level of low humidity and we look at our beautiful mushrooms? So I've seen the containers change a lot over time. And I'm sure there's some science and some technology around it, but I'm not at all impressed with these polypropylene containers. I think the original ones that are kind of a cardboard is the best, but it must be too expensive because they don't use them as much anymore. So these are not good to keep, in my opinion, because they will tend to sweat and not let the moisture dissipate. And so that's exactly why I asked Mary to bring me over my bag. Where did my bag go? Because I'm not going to wash these yet. Again, the moisture is the enemy of the mushroom. So we're going to put them into my little bag here. So no light. That's just how a mushroom likes to live. And I'm not going to let them get wet. And I'm going to fold down the bag. And I might put, you know, mushrooms on here so I can remember and not forget that I have beautiful mushrooms. They will tend to dry out a little bit if we let them stay longer than a week. But usually mushrooms stay really nicely in a brown bag for a week. So you can certainly put them in the low humidity crisper. But if you want, they could go on a shelf too. So mushrooms are kind of a either or. They could go into the crisper, but they for sure love to be in some kind of absorbent material. So a brown bag is kind of my favorite. Of course, you can buy anything on Amazon, and you can buy a very fancy mushroom bag that is, supposed to be the bee's knees because it keeps the moisture away from the mushroom and it still allows it to be somewhat of a moist, cool environment. So again, finding that sweet spot, is, I guess, technology at its finest, but you can't go wrong with a brown bag that costs pretty much nothing, especially if you buy a meal from Powerhouse and we give you the bag. So I love this, and it's really been a kind of a standby for, generations, that mushrooms go really well in a brown bag. Okay, so now what about fruit? So I also learned that fruit, of course, it gives off a gas, ethylene, that helps to promote ripening. So if you had, say, some bananas and you wanted them to ripen up, what do you pair it with? Yes! So the brown bag comes handy again, and you could put an apple in with your bananas. If you want to make banana bread and you happen to only find greenish ones at the store, a banana plus your brown bag is a great little gadget for getting your bananas ripe. So that is a whole new kind of environment that we get to investigate, is the world of fruits. How do we preserve the fruits, and how do we even use the fruit chemical or gas that it gives off to our benefit? So fruits. So for sure we want them to live separately from veggies. So veggies are way over here. Separate. The gas that it gives off is ethylene. And we just want to make sure that if we want to ripen bananas, we can add an apple or two, which is a perfect example of that gas to help promote the ripening. So what about berries? Berries are not only expensive, they are very finicky, right? Very finicky. So it's even not uncommon when we're at a grocery store and we peek into some berries and we see a moldy one, right? That's like what we're always searching for, is I do not want a moldy berry. This is going to cost me $5. It better be perfect, right? And so the first thing we want to do when we come home, after we've already peeked in all corners of our berries, is we want to be able to rinse them and, of course, dry them. So we're not going to rinse them with average water, though. What we're going to do is we are going to do a 1-to-5 ratio of water and vinegar. And that's going to help us stop any potential fungus that's on the outside of the strawberry or other berry, so that we can make sure it's going to stay fresher longer. Wouldn't you know, I grabbed one that hasn't even been opened. So 1-to-5 ratio is pretty important, meaning you want, for 5 drops of water, you want 1 drop of vinegar. So very small amount. Let me open this guy up here. And you don't need much. I mean, I could fill up the bowl, I suppose, but I just want a little bit to sprinkle over them and kind of douse it, and then, be able to not let them soak in it. If you do too much of the vinegar, of course, it's going to ruin the flavor of your berries. So you want to be careful it's not too much. Okay, so I'm going to do my 5 parts of water. Five parts of water to 1 part of vinegar. Okay. And stir it up just a little bit and put it all around the strawberries. And I'm just kind of letting them soak. Again, it doesn't have to cover them, but just enough to get them kind of in that water. It barely smells like vinegar. So I know I didn't formally measure that. Don't get me on that. But you guys measure it. 1-to-5. So if you did a third of a cup of water, I can give you a couple of the ratios, but there's 16 tablespoons per cup. So if you wanted to do 3 tablespoons to 1, that would get you pretty close. Okay, so that's good. Now I'm going to lift them out, dry them off really well with one of my clean towels. I wouldn't take the stems off. Probably not a bad idea to rinse them after you do your vinegar bath. I would probably do that. I mean, again, this is kind of new for me, but I see a lot of dirty water. And so it makes me realize those little kids that grab a strawberry. I mean, look at all that dirty water, right? So I would dump this. I would do a fresh bath of fresh running water, and then I would put them in my container. So let me show you a nice small container. I'm going to use this one, I think. Go ahead and use this one. So I want really it to be more wide than tall, but this will give us at least the idea. And I think what, after doing this class, it's really again taught me that I'd kind of like to have a designated spot in my refrigerator for my berries, my leafies, and my root vegetables, just kind of leave it formally set up for it so that other things don't just take over. So after I've rinsed these with some water, then I want to have the dry towel in my container, and then they should just be nestled in. So again, it'd be nice if this was a little bit more shallow. I could certainly use a bowl, but that's going to take a lot of space in my refrigerator. So I could see that being just perfect. The other thing we could do is probably layer them. So you could do paper towels and do a layer of paper towels in the base, put your strawberries in, one more layer, good airflow, no moisture so they're nice and dry. No moisture, so then it works really well to keep them from getting any mold. So really nice little setup. And I think at Whole Foods and even Trader Joe's, they do sell some neat little containers, and the container store is another spot that would really be fun to set up areas of your fridge where you always put your berries, you always put your leafies, and then it kind of sets you up for your shopping during the week. You're always going to get, there's your best foods list, and you got your groceries set up for your refrigerator when you get home. So I'm going to do more of that, I promise. Okay, so now, what about things that are a little more neutral? So I consider the peppers and celery quite neutral, and meaning that they're kind of easygoing. They'll certainly do pretty well in the crisper. I mean, gosh, for probably a week or two. So the question would be, do we prep them? Do we take off the packaging, and do we prep them by taking off the stem? I kind of think yes. That's what we typically do here. So again, if I'm a really good, I guess, frontier woman, I would figure out how to make this grow into my next batch of celery. So let's see if we can do that. But the other thing I would do is wash the celery, because it tends to have, now this one actually looks pretty clean, it tends to have lots of dirt in there. So some of my patients that are going through chemo, I don't even want them to eat raw veggies, because it, look at how much dirt comes out of a clean set of berries. So I think washing them first is so valuable. Now, when it comes to asparagus, it's not as tender. It's not as easy to manage as celery. So even though they're about the same size, they're going to manage quite differently. Celery, I'm going to wash it, put it in a paper towel. I could wrap it, or again a towel, and certainly put it into a Cambro or one of my containers. Most of the time, though, they're so tall that it's not going to easily fit. So again, this is one where I easily will cut it in half. It's very easy going. So I'm going to wash it, cut it in half, and do my layers. And even if I don't have the paper towel or a towel, celery has so much internal moisture that it's really easy to manage. As long as I have a nice fitting lid, it's going to fit really well in there. The asparagus, on the other hand, because it's so temperamental, I would probably put it in water just like the flowers. So I'm going to trim the edges just like I would do flowers, and I'm going to put them right into my little mason jar of water. And then they will last so long. And again, find a spot on your refrigerator where it has a little height, because these actually like to be open. We don't really want to cover them up. I mean, if you need to, you certainly could use the damp towel or paper towel and fold them into it, but they actually do so well when they're open, just like flowers. And so finding a mason jar that's just about the right size and putting them in so they hold stable, and I've just got a little bit of water there at the base. So that's a great way to do the asparagus. So again, the size-wise, it really has nothing to do with how well they are stored, and of course how well they withstand moisture or not. The asparagus absolutely needs to be able to draw up moisture and keep it looking crisp and pretty. You've probably seen it at H-E-B, the way they even store them. You know, they're in a little case with water. I just see full of bacteria when I see that, though, because it's, you know, germs love wet, and it's not actually very cold. So that's why I always cut them the moment I get them home. And, you know, this could certainly go into your compost. I probably wouldn't put it into my veggie broth. But, I mean, anything that's going to boil will kill most of the bacteria anyway. So I think either way, you'll be just fine. Okay, so what about the peppers? How should we store these babies? The good news is they are low humidity. They don't need a lot of moisture. In fact, they will tend to get a soft spot if they're sitting in moisture. So we could trim the edge and store it in a Cambro or something with just the tips touching the moisture. That's usually what we do here, just to keep them really crispy. Now, if we're going to cook them and chop them up anyway, it doesn't really have to stay crispy, but they just are fun to have in their best state. So I trim off the end just like I do with the flowers, and I just kind of stand them up, and I have my towel in the bottom, and it works really well to keep them crispy and firm for at least a week. Okay, so that works out great. Now, it's not uncommon here at the bakery. As soon as we get these, we actually throw them in the oven. So another way to store them really nicely is to cut them in half, take the seeds out, and they store beautifully just like this. If the seeds are out and we just have the outer shell, there's much less chance of it getting moldy. So if you know you're going to be roasting them, or you're not sure what you're going to do with them yet, you know, you want to keep your options open, this is the way to do it. But if you know you're going to grill them or roast them, I would just go ahead and take the seed out and the stem, and that way they'll last even longer. So I just kind of weave my knife into the top, like I showed you with our paring knife sometimes. Here I use my utility knife. But this works really well, and I'm going to take off that stem so that this does not cause moldy, because usually the mold happens right at the connection point of the stem and the base. Okay? So then these can go in the moist area, or I can even put these into a baggie and remind me that this is my next job, because it's open, right? I don't have it covered up. My next job is to get these grilled right away for making maybe my vegetarian enchilada. So love having that ready to go. So now my final thing is cucumbers. Cucumbers get mushy. I've really noticed, and even buying the English cucumber, it's disappointing if you get one day 1 and day 2 or 3, it's already mushy. So how do we fix that? Now, the good news is cucumbers do have a waxy coating, which again helps it in transport, but it's not good for eating. So this one I would absolutely wash with a mild soap and water. So kind of like the turnips. It has that funky wax on it. So I would clean that off, dry it really well, and then I would use my dry towel, or again, a paper towel is just fine, and I would fold them in. So fold them in after each one is washed into a towel, and I just layer them like I did the leaf lettuces, and it's going to hold up beautifully in my fridge just like this. So I've got 4 cucumbers in there, and just alternatively put in and folded the towel over, and so Again, you can get cute little towels, maybe even one that has a cucumber on it so you know which is which. You're right. I mean, the organizers in us could just go crazy and have fun with all these options. But again, the cucumber does not do well in the crisper because it doesn't want the humidity, and it also doesn't want the low humidity where it has a lot of air circulation. It does better if it's in the towel. Okay, so I think, oh, my last item, I've kind of closed myself in, haven't I? The broccoli. So it looks like it's set up for success, washed, trimmed, and ready to eat. But oftentimes what happens is the bags get moisture in them, and then right away they get yellow or moldy on the inside. And so this is where we absolutely need to unpack the way that the producer has given it to us and start over. So I'm going to open up the bag, put them into a bowl with some fresh water. So we want plenty of fresh water. We're going to take it out of this bag, unless we're going to use it day 1. If we're going to use it day 2 or day 3, we need to wash it. So fresh running water, rinse and drain. You could even do the vinegar, the 5-to-1, 5 parts water to 1 part vinegar. And that way it'll stay really nice much longer. Drain it really well, and then put it into a Cambro that has plenty of room. So I probably would use this guy. Plenty of room. After you drain it the best you can, paper towel in, and then drop it in so that it's loose. Give it lots of space for air around the edges. If you notice that the broccoli has brown on the ends, definitely take the time to cut those off. This one actually looked pretty fresh and nice. But you know, the good news is, even if you get some fruits that kind of are the day old and they have some brown on the ends, cutting that off and letting it get into contact with some fresh water perks it right up. And then store it in your Cambro with a tight fitting lid, and that's perfect. Okay, so in summary, let's see my gadgets that I want to share. I didn't cover up my pen. There it is. So when we think of keeping moisture and light out, you know, it's really going to help to have the little brown bags. And if you need to use that ethylene gas to your benefit, then you can really do that. Some of the veggies that are kind of more neutral, they're not very picky, they allow us to have some flexibility in our fridge. And so using the towel method, it can either be a dry towel or a moist towel. Always trying to normalize the amount of liquid or moisture around the veggie. So when we talked about for moist, if we did the broccoli, as long as it's cold, you've shaken off as much water as you can, and then you wrap it, that'll work out beautifully. The cucumber needs to be dry. Again, even if you don't have the towel, this one's flexible. It could even go into a Cambro. Peppers, same thing. Peppers could live with the towel, but again, we don't really want to use the towels if we don't absolutely have to. So peppers and broccoli are really flexible because that little Cambro is an excellent way to store them so that they are airtight and they're not sitting in moisture. Celery is the same one. Peppers, celery, cucumber. Also with the Cambro. So paper towel as an option. Washing them ahead of time is super important. Wash ahead. Okay? That way we'll have plenty of veggies at our fingertips when we're ready to prepare. And again, doing your meal prep, even when you're putting things away, you could turn on the oven, throw your butternut in while it's roasting away. You could be prepping your asparagus and your herbs so they'll be storing for the week. You could fold up your bok choy into some towel, or you could layer them into a Cambro with some paper towel, and so it'll be easy to grab it, finish off the production when you're ready.